Chapter 1. The Monster in the Sea. On July 20th, 1866, the sailors on a steamship saw a strange reef near Australia. The reef was not on the map. The captain decided to measure it. Suddenly, it sent 2 spouts of water high into the air. Then it disappeared. 3 days later, another steamship saw it. It was 700 leagues away in the Pacific Ocean. 2 weeks later, and 2,000 leagues further away, another ship saw it. What was it? "It was about 100 meters long," said one sailor. "It was 200 meters long," said another. "It made a spout of water like a whale." "I saw 2 spouts." "It made a whistling noise." "It made a roaring noise." "I think it is a very large whale." "It's much too big for a whale. It must be a submarine ship." "It's a monster." "I think you've all been dreaming," said a sailor who was asleep when the others saw it. On March 5th, 1867, a ship called Moravian hit a rock that was not on the map. It was damaged, but did not sink. When it reached port, the sailors discovered that there was a lot of damage. On April 13th, 1867, something hit a British ship called Scotia. It was not a big hit, but it made a large, neat, triangular hole in the 4-centimeter thick hull. The sailors could not believe their eyes. Now, everybody began to talk about the danger of ships being hit and sunk. Some ships did sink, and everybody blamed the strange monster, although nobody could prove anything. At this time, I was a teacher at the Museum of Natural History in Paris, but I was studying animals in America. I had written some books about sea animals, so people asked me what I thought about the monster. Could it be a floating reef, Dr. Aronnax? Could it be the wreck of a ship? I thought it could not be either of those because it traveled around too quickly. Is it a submarine ship, Dr. Aronnax? I did not think so. Who could build it? No government could build such a ship without other people knowing about it. It had to be an animal. It might be a large narwhal with a horn, I said. It must be 10 times larger and stronger than usual. Perhaps an animal like this might have come from the deepest part of the ocean, where no man has ever been. For scientists like me, it was a very interesting situation to investigate. For other people, it was much more than simply being interesting. They wanted to kill this mysterious monster because it was endangering human life. Passengers were too afraid to cross the Atlantic. This was bad for business. The Americans prepared a steamship and added additional weaponry in order to hunt and kill the monster. They waited for somebody to see it again. Nobody saw it for over 3 months. People made jokes about it. It can read the newspapers. It hides when it knows we are looking for it. It can read the telegrams that we send on cables under the seas. Finally, another ship saw it in the North Pacific. The Americans set off from New York. I had been invited to come with them, and I was on board with my servant, Counsel. The ship was the Abraham Lincoln under Captain Farragut. Captain Farragut was a good sailor. He was determined to kill the monster. He said he would give $2,000 to the first person to see it. All the sailors watched the sea carefully. One sailor, however, did not watch the sea at all. This tall sailor read books or slept in his room. His name was Ned Land, and he was a very good harpooner. "I don't believe in the monster," he said. We became friends because he could speak French. He told me many stories about whaling. The Abraham Lincoln sailed down the coast of South America. Early in July, we sailed around Cape Horn and into the Pacific. A few weeks later, we crossed the equator. "We've been looking for almost 3 months. Perhaps it doesn't exist," said one sailor to another sailor on duty with him. "I agree with Ned," said a third. Soon, Captain Farragut was the only person who still believed in the monster. The other sailors all wanted to go home. "Give me another 3 days," said Captain Farragut. "If we do not see it, we will go home." The sailors agreed. They all began to look for it again. Chapter 2. There it is. There it is! There it is! It was almost dark at the end of the second day. Ned Land had come out of his cabin and was standing on the deck. Everybody rushed to him because he was pointing to the monster. The monster made a bright light under the sea. "It's a huge electric eel!" cried one sailor. "It's coming toward us!" shouted another. The captain tried to get out of the way, but the monster was much faster than the ship. It followed us. "Why don't you attack it?" I asked Captain Farragut. "It is too dark to attack it, Dr. Aronnax. We will wait until morning." Suddenly, the monster's light disappeared. It was dark. We could not see it, but we could hear it. It sounded like a huge engine when it breathed. "Ned, you were the first to see it. You will get the $2,000, said Captain Farragut. "I just want to get close enough to harpoon it," he replied. The sailors loaded their guns. Ned Land sharpened his harpoon. Everything was ready. When morning came, we saw the monster about 2 kilometers behind us. It rose from the water and beat its tail against the waves. It sent 2 spouts of water into the air. It began to swim around us. Captain Farragut told the sailors to steer the ship toward it at full speed. The ship raced forwards, but it could get no closer to the monster. It did not dive but moved away as quickly as we moved toward it. We went faster. The monster went faster. We could not get closer. It played with us by making circles around us. Captain Farragut ordered the sailors to shoot at it. The first shot missed. The second shot hit the monster, but did not hurt it. "Its skin is too thick. It's like steel." We chased the monster all day, traveling 400 kilometers, but it did not tire. That night the monster lit up again. We let the ship quietly float closer and closer, until at last Ned Land could throw his harpoon. It hit the monster, and the light went out. Then there was a huge crash, and I was thrown into the sea. I sank into the water, but soon came back to the surface. I could see the ship, but it was already a long way from me. I swam toward it, calling out, "Help!" My clothes were heavy in the water, and I began to sink. Suddenly, I felt a hand take me back to the surface again. It was Counsel. "Were you thrown into the water too?" I asked. "No, I just followed you." He was a very faithful servant. He had a knife, and we cut our clothes off and then tried to swim toward the ship. It went further away from us. Perhaps the collision had damaged its steering. We swam for 2 hours, calling out all the time. At last we heard another voice and swam toward it. Just as I thought I would drown, we were pulled out of the water by a tall, strong man. It was Ned Land. He was standing on the monster. "My harpoon could not hurt this monster," he said. "It is made of steel." This was true. I realized that I had been wrong. This was not a giant narwhal. It was a submarine. I could not understand how anybody could have built it, but I could not doubt that it was real. The submarine began to move. We were worried that it might dive. It moved faster and faster. We held on to an iron ring that Ned saw. As it sped through the night, I wondered how it could move so fast. What kind of engine did it have? What kind of people were inside it? When morning came, it began to sink. Ned banged on the steel. "Open up!" he shouted angrily. The sinking stopped. We heard a noise, and one of the steel plates opened. A man came out and saw us. He was very surprised and went back into the submarine. A few seconds later, 8 men came out and pulled us into the submarine. Chapter 3. Promises. We were alone in complete darkness and silence. The men who had dragged us into the submarine had not spoken as they pushed us into the dark room and locked us in. Who were they? What would they do to us? Ned Land was angry and began to shout. "Shouting will not help," I said. "We should stay calm." Suddenly, there was a very bright light in the room. We saw a table and 5 chairs, and a moment later our door opened, and 2 men entered. One of them was short and strong. The other was tall, handsome, and confident. It was easy to see that the tall man was the captain. They spoke to each other in a language that I could not understand. I told them our story, speaking in French, but they did not seem to understand me. Ned repeated the story in English and Counsel in German, but they did not speak. I told it again in Latin, They sat and looked at us, and then got up and left the room, locking the door behind them. A few minutes later, the door opened again. A man brought in some clothes for us, and another man brought us food. The food was beautifully prepared and served, as if we were in a 5-star hotel. We ate hungrily, and then lay down to sleep on the carpet. When I woke up, I found it difficult to breathe. There was not enough air in our room. I wondered how the submarine got air, and decided that it must come to the surface every night. A few moments later, fresh air came into the room through a vent above the door. Ned and Counsel woke up. We were all very hungry again. Ned wanted to find a way to escape from the submarine or attack the crew and take it over. I told him that we needed to be more careful. He should try to control his temper. We were left alone for a long time, and Ned was becoming very angry. When at last the door opened and a man came in, Ned attacked him. "Please be calm, Mr. Land," said a voice. We were surprised to see that it was the captain, speaking French. "I can speak French, English, German, and Latin," he said. "I understood everything that you said when you told me your story. I could not visit you again sooner than this because I had to decide what to do with you. Your ship haunted me. You shot at me with your guns and hit me with your harpoon. You wanted to destroy me. You are my enemies, and I could throw you into the sea to die." "No civilized man would do that," I exclaimed. "I am not what you call a civilized man," he replied angrily. "However, I decided that it might be interesting to let you live. You are free to go around the ship and see everything that happens. However, I want you to promise 2 things. "What are they?" "First, if I tell you to go to your rooms, you will go immediately without fighting." "We promise. What is the second promise?" "You must promise that you will never leave the ship without my permission." "Then we cannot try to escape," exclaimed Ned Land. "That's right. I am the only one who will decide if and when you may leave. If you do not accept this, I will put you outside, and the ship will dive. We will not hear you this time." "We have no choice," I told Ned Land. "We will have to promise." "Good," said the captain. "You will not be sorry, Dr. Aronnax, because you will see many interesting things as we continue our journey. I have read your books, and I know that you love animals of the sea." It was an exciting opportunity. I would see things that no scientist had seen before. Should I exchange my freedom for it? I was going to shake his hand to show that we had reached an agreement. However, he ignored my hand. "What should we call you?" I asked. "My name is Captain Nemo," he told us. "The name of my ship is Nautilus." Chapter 4. Captain Nemo and the Nautilus. We were still very hungry. A servant took Counsel and Ned to their cabin, where they had a meal. Captain Nemo took me to the dining room. It was a very beautiful room with expensive furniture. We sat at a table in the middle of the room and ate a delicious lunch. He told me that all the food came from the sea. "I love the sea," he said. "It gives me everything that I need. Even my clothes come from the sea. It is a place of perfect peace. There are no governments, no taxes, and no wars. Here, I am truly free. I will never return to the land." He took me to see the library. It had thousands of books in many different languages. Then he showed me the art gallery. It had many paintings by famous artists. There was a piano in the room, and I saw music scores by all the famous composers in a nearby bookshelf. The next room was a museum. It contained many thousands of wonderful shells, pearls, and other treasures from the sea. I had never seen such a good museum. Captain Nemo was very proud of his collection and very proud of the Nautilus. Then he took me to my cabin. It was a very comfortable bedroom and was next to his cabin. His cabin had an instrument panel, and on this he could see everything that he needed to know to sail the Nautilus. He told me that he had discovered a way to make electricity using salt and mercury. This electricity gave the Nautilus all the power it needed to move through the water. Huge pumps filled and emptied tanks of air and water to make the Nautilus sink or rise. I was surprised to discover that the Nautilus even had a small dinghy. Captain Nemo could enter the dinghy from the Nautilus while it was underwater and go to the surface. Then the Nautilus would come up to collect him. As we walked to the engine room, we passed the large kitchen and crew room. The door of the crew room was closed, so I could not see how many men were required to work on the Nautilus. Captain Nemo showed me the engine and explained how it worked. It was difficult to understand how the tanks, rudders, and batteries worked. However, I had to believe it because it worked. The Nautilus was 70 meters long and 8 meters wide. It had a cylindrical shape, with points on each end, and weighed 1,500 tons. A pilot sat in a small room with strong windows, and a powerful electric light showed him where he was going. "It's a wonderful ship," I exclaimed. "I love it as if it were my child," he replied. "How did you build it in secret?" I asked. "All the parts were made in different countries. I used different names each time I placed an order. I took all the parts to a desert island, and my workmen put them together. Then we burned our workshops." "It must have cost a fortune," I exclaimed. "Millions of dollars," he replied. "However, I have billions." The Nautilus came to the surface. The sea was calm, and the weather was fine. All we could see was water. Captain Nemo used his instruments to find out exactly where we were. "We are 300 miles away from Japan," he said. We went back inside the Nautilus. Captain Nemo told me that he was traveling east-northeast at a depth of 50 meters. Then he left me. I wondered why he was roaming the seas in his submarine. Why did he refuse to return to the land? He had been very polite to me, but why had he refused to shake my hand? I had no answers to these questions. I turned to the maps in the library and studied them. We were close to a current called the Black River and would soon cross it. Ned Land and Council were as astonished at the library and museum as I was. Council loved the museum because I had taught him a lot about the sea animals that I studied. He and Ned had already become good friends. Ned loved fish as animals to hunt and eat. Council loved them as animals to study and classify. Although Council and Ned enjoyed each other's company, Ned was still interested in trying to find a way to escape. I told him that he should stop thinking about it for the moment. It would be impossible. Then the lights went out, and we were in complete darkness. Some panels opened, and we could look out into the ocean. It was a beautiful sight, and even Ned was amazed. We enjoyed naming all the fish we saw. 2 hours later, the panels closed again. We went to our rooms for dinner. I expected to see Captain Nemo after dinner, but he did not appear. Chapter 5. A Visit to a Forest. It was a week before I saw Captain Nemo again. Every morning I noticed fresh air coming into the rooms, and I knew that the Nautilus had surfaced. I would go out and see the sunrise. Then I received a note from Captain Nemo. He invited me and my friends to go hunting with him in the forest of Crespo Island. Ned was excited. He thought there might be an opportunity to escape. I was not so sure. When I saw Captain Nemo the next day, I asked him why he was so interested in Crespo Island. "I thought you preferred the sea to being on land." "I do," replied the captain. "But these forests are under the sea." During breakfast, he explained that he had made diving suits that use special air tanks. These tanks would allow us to stay under the water for 10 hours. He had also made lights that worked on electric batteries and an air gun with electric bullets. When Ned realized that we were not going on to land for our hunting trip, he decided not to come at all. Council and I put on our diving suits, and so did Captain Nemo and one of his men. We stepped into a room and closed the door. The room filled with water, and another door opened. We went through it, and we were on the sea floor. It was an amazing experience. We were about 10 meters under the water. The light from the sun reached us. Everything looked very colorful. We walked over the fine sand and enjoyed the colors of the shells, fish, and seaweed. Council and I followed Captain Nemo and his man as they crossed a large grassy area. We were going deeper and deeper. 2 hours later, we were 100 meters under the water. The suits worked very well, and it was easy to walk and breathe. At 100 meters deep, we could still see quite well. and Captain Nemo stopped and pointed to some dark shapes. This was the forest. The trees in the forest were giant seaweed, and all their branches were vertical. We could not stop looking at them. Fish swam around the branches like birds in a forest. Small shrubs grew under the large seaweed trees. Some of them had flowers. We walked through this forest for about an hour, and then we lay down to rest. I was not hungry, but I was very sleepy. We all slept, and when we woke up, we walked further. Suddenly, I saw a large sea spider, about a meter tall. It was going to attack me. Captain Nemo's man killed it with his air rifle. But it reminded me that the sea could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. We continued to walk downhill. When we reached 150 meters, it was dark. The sun's light could not reach this depth. We switched on our lights. We could see about 25 yards around us. Finally, we came to a steep rock wall. It rose in front of us, and we could go no further. I thought that this must be Crespo Island. We walked back toward the Nautilus. However, we went a different and steeper way, and we were soon in 10 meters of water again. We walked among the fish. Suddenly, Captain Nemo stopped and shot an animal with his air rifle. It was a beautiful and rare sea otter. His man picked it up and carried it over his shoulder. Later, the man surprised me by shooting an albatross from under the water. At last, we could see the Nautilus. I was happy to see it because I was now quite tired. Suddenly, Captain Nemo pushed me to the ground and lay beside me. His man did the same to Counsel. Several large sharks swam over us. Luckily, they did not see us. Half an hour later, we were in the room full of water. The door closed, and the water was pumped out. We re-entered the Nautilus and took off our diving suits. I was exhausted, but amazed by what I had seen. Chapter 6. On Dry Land. The Nautilus surfaced again the next morning, and I went outside to see the sunrise as usual. Captain Nemo came up to take some measurements. Then about 20 men came up and pulled in a net. It was full of different kinds of fish. They took these into the Nautilus. I could see that we would always have something to eat. The Nautilus now traveled southeast at a depth of 100 to 150 meters. One day, for no reason that I could see, it went down to 2,000 meters. We crossed the Tropic of Cancer, and the next day we saw Hawaii. We continued traveling southeast and crossed the equator. A week later, we passed through an enormous school of squid. There were millions of them. We saw a very sad sight 2 days after that. A ship had sunk, perhaps just a couple of hours before we saw it. We could still see drowned people on the deck. One of them was a mother holding her baby. Sharks were circling the ship and would soon eat the dead people. I saw the name of the ship. It was the Florida. As we continued through these waters, we often saw shipwrecks. Many of them were very old. As we sailed through some Pacific islands, I explained to Captain Nemo that the coral was slowly building new land. "We do not need new land," he said. "We need new people." We crossed the Tropic of Capricorn and changed our direction. The Nautilus now traveled west-northwest to Tahiti, Tonga, and Fiji. We had been on the Nautilus for about 2 months when we reached Vanikoro. This was the island where the ship of a famous French sailor called La Pérouse had been wrecked on a reef. 3 days later, we were near New Guinea and entered the Torres Strait. These were dangerous waters, so the Nautilus traveled slowly on the surface. The Nautilus unfortunately hit a reef and stopped. It was not damaged, but it was stuck. Captain Nemo, however, was not worried. He looked at his charts. "In 4 days, there will be a high tide that will lift the Nautilus off the reef," he told me. "We will wait for it." Ned wanted to go on to the island and catch some animals to eat. He was not satisfied with the seafood we had eaten for the last 2 months. Consul agreed with him, and I asked Captain Nemo if he would put us on land for a short time. I thought he would refuse, and was surprised when he agreed. We were allowed to use the dinghy. Captain Nemo did not come with us. We went alone. Ned was very excited. "We are going to eat meat," he said. Half an hour of rowing brought us to the island. It was wonderful to walk on land again. Ned immediately found some coconuts. We drank the milk. Then we walked into the forest and found some breadfruit trees. Ned cooked some of the breadfruit, which tasted just like real bread. We found fruits like bananas and mangoes. Ned still wanted some meat, but it was time to go back to the Nautilus. We brought the food that we had found back with us. We returned to the island the next day and hunted birds. Ned shot 2 pigeons, which we cooked and ate for lunch. In the afternoon, he shot a wild pig and several smaller animals like rabbits. We sat near the boat to cook and eat them. But we were suddenly attacked. We all ran to the boat. About 100 savages followed us into the water as we rowed away, but they could not catch us. Back on the Nautilus, I found Captain Nemo. He was playing his piano. I told him about the savages. "You should not be surprised that there are savages on land, Dr. Aronnax," he said. "They may try to come onto the Nautilus," I said. "How many are there?" "About 100. "We have nothing to fear," he replied. He turned back to his piano. I went back outside. It was dark, and I could see fires on the beach. The savages were still there. Chapter 7. Electricity on Land and Sea. Captain Nemo seemed very sure that the savages could not harm us. I slept well. When I went outside the next morning, I saw that there were many more natives on the beach. It was low tide, and many of them had come quite close to the Nautilus. I asked Council to get a net, and we used it to get some shells from the water. They were very pretty shells. Suddenly, I saw a very rare and beautiful shell. We looked at it together. One of the savages threw a stone at us and broke the shell. Council was very angry. He fired his gun at the savage. Then, we noticed that the savages had come very close to the Nautilus in their canoes. A few moments later, they began to shoot their arrows at us. We went inside and told Captain Nemo about it. He ordered his men to close the doors. "But what will happen tomorrow?" I asked. "You will have to open the doors to get more air, and the savages will come in." "Do you think they will dare?" "I am sure they will. We have nothing to fear," he said again. Captain Nemo asked me about our trip to the island. I told him what we had seen and done. We talked about another French sailor called d'Urville, whose ship was wrecked in the Torres Strait. He told me again that the high tide the next day would lift the Nautilus off the reef. That night I could hear the savages jumping onto the Nautilus. It was difficult to sleep. The crew of the Nautilus, however, took no notice of the savages. They did not open the doors the next morning, and I stayed in my room. The tide rose. At 2:30, Captain Nemo told us that he was going to open the doors. The Nautilus was about to leave because the tide was at its highest. "If you open the doors, the savages will come in," I said. "I don't think so," replied Captain Nemo. "Come and see." I watched the crew open the doors. 20 angry faces appeared. The first savage put his hand on the rail. He fell backwards and ran away, jumping and shouting. The next savage did the same. 10 others tried. They all fell back and ran away. Ned wanted to see what was happening and put his hand on the rail to climb up the ladder. He fell back and shouted too. I understood. Captain Nemo had put electricity into the rail. Anybody who touched it would receive an electric shock. Just then the tide lifted the Nautilus off the reef. Captain Nemo had been right. The savages all jumped off the Nautilus as it sailed away. And soon we were out of the Torres Strait. We traveled at high speed under the water for several days. I was amazed at the power of the electricity that Captain Nemo used. We entered the Timor Sea and briefly saw the island of Timor when we surfaced. We sailed into the Indian Ocean. I wondered where Captain Nemo was going. Would he return to Asia or go south to Antarctica? Might he go to Europe? Only time would tell. We sailed without direction in the Indian Ocean. Captain Nemo performed temperature experiments at different depths. I didn't understand his purpose, since he would never go on land to tell anyone the results of these experiments. However, He told me about his work. I realized that he had been in every sea in the world. One day, we sailed through a large cloud of animals that made a light stronger than the lights of the Nautilus. It was like magic in the sea. A few days later, a crew member called Captain Nemo outside. He looked through a telescope. The crew members seemed nervous. I tried to see what they were looking at, but saw nothing. I went inside and got my telescope, but Captain Nemo would not let me use it. He looked very angrily through his own. Then he told me that I had to take Ned and Council and go back to the dark room where we had been locked up on the first day. I wanted to ask a question, but he would not allow it. Go now, he said. We went to the room, and the crew served some lunch. After lunch, Ned fell asleep. Then Council fell asleep. I realized that our lunch had been drugged, and then I also fell asleep. Chapter 8. Death Under the Sea. When I woke up, I was surprised to discover that I was in my own room. Somebody had put me there while I was asleep. The same had happened to Ned and Council. Our rooms were not locked, and we were as free as before. Captain Nemo did not appear until about 2 o'clock. He didn't explain anything. I didn't dare to ask. He looked very sad. "Are you a doctor?" he asked me. I had studied medicine in Paris. When I told him that, he asked me to help one of his men. I followed him to another room. A man lay on a bed with a very bad head wound. I looked at it. "What happened?" Captain Nemo answered. "Something broke in the engine. A heavy piece of metal hit his head." "He is going to die soon," I said. "Nothing can save him." Tears filled Captain Nemo's eyes, and he asked me to leave. The next day, he invited me to go with him for another walk under the water. I agreed, and my 2 friends decided to come too. We went out and found that we were not on sand but on coral. We used our lights to go deeper and deeper into the ocean. Some of the crew had come with us. 4 of them carried the coffin of the man who had died. We walked for 2 hours and stopped when we reached 300 meters. This is where coral begins to form. Some of the crew had brought tools with them, and they dug a hole in the coral. They placed the coffin in it. Then they covered the coffin with rocks. I could see that there had been other burials here in the past. It was a sad and strange experience to attend this funeral. We returned to the Nautilus. "Your dead friend is safe from sharks," I said to Captain Nemo. "And from men," he added angrily. I began to think that Captain Nemo was not just escaping from humanity in his Nautilus. He was planning revenge. As the Nautilus sailed closer to India and civilization, I also began to think about escaping. I realized that I did not really want to escape. This voyage under the seas was too interesting to stop. I loved studying the fish and shells of the sea. I was going where no scientist had been before. Why should I escape? Sometimes we traveled more than 500 miles a day. We passed Keeling Island and headed for the tip of India. We sailed through huge armies of shells and sometimes large crowds of sharks. Closer to India, we sailed through a sea of milk. The water was white because of an uncountable number of tiny white worms. We were close to Sri Lanka. Captain Nemo invited me to see the pearl fisheries there. "We may also hunt some sharks," he added. He invited Ned and Council, but did not tell them about the sharks. They were very excited, but I couldn't stop thinking about the sharks. They made me afraid. Ned thought we might find a valuable pearl. We could sell it if we ever escaped. We sailed toward the Gulf of Mannar. "That is where the best pearls are," said Captain Nemo. It was very early in the morning when we arrived. The Nautilus surfaced, and we used the dinghy to row to the pearl fishery. Then we put on our diving suits and entered the water. The sea was only a meter deep at first, but it soon became deeper. Captain Nemo, Ned, Council, and I soon disappeared under the waves. 5 crew members stayed on the dinghy. They were waiting for us to return. 10 minutes later, we were 3 meters below the surface. It was so beautiful there that I forgot about the sharks. The fish were very colorful. I saw sea snakes, large crabs, and turtles. We followed Captain Nemo. He showed us a huge pile of oysters. Nature can make more than man can destroy. Ned started to fill a bag with oysters, but we had to go further. We followed the captain into a cave. There we saw a huge oyster. It was about 2 meters wide and had a pearl the size of a coconut. We left it there and returned to the oyster beds. Captain Nemo stopped and pointed to a shadow moving in the water. What could it be? Chapter 9. A Brave and Generous Captain. What had Captain Nemo seen? I saw it too. At first, I thought it was a shark. It wasn't. It was a boat. A pearl fisher was diving from it into about 15 meters of water. He put about 10 oysters in a bag. Then he had to go back to the boat for air. We watched him do this several times. He had seen a very large shark. It was coming at him, ready to attack. He quickly avoided its open mouth and sharp teeth, but it hit him with its tail. Captain Nemo stabbed the shark with his knife, and the shark's blood made the water red. But the shark kept moving violently. I saw Captain Nemo holding one of the fins and putting his knife into the shark again and again. The shark was still alive. It knocked the captain and opened its mouth to attack. Ned then attacked and killed it. He picked up the diver and carried him back up to the boat. He was still alive. He opened his eyes and saw us. He was very afraid, but Captain Nemo gave him some pearls. Then we headed back to the dinghy. "Thank you, Ned Land," said the captain. "I owed you that one," said Ned. Captain Nemo smiled. We passed the body of the dead shark floating on the water. Other sharks savagely attacked it and ate it. It made me realize how bravely and generously Captain Nemo had behaved. I told him what I thought. "That man is an oppressed worker," he replied. "Oppressed workers are my friends." We sailed away from Sri Lanka into the Gulf of Oman. The Nautilus had traveled 7,500 leagues since we came aboard. Ned asked me where we were going. "Wherever the captain wants us to go," I replied. "We are entering the Gulf of Oman." "But the Gulf of Oman goes nowhere," he said. "We will just have to come back." "Perhaps he wants to visit the Red Sea." "But we will still have to come back." That was true. De Lesseps was building a canal between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, but it was not finished. The only way to the Mediterranean was to go around Africa. "We've been on this submarine for 3 months," said Ned. "When will it end?" What could I say? I didn't want it to end. "If you see a chance to escape, tell me about it. Until then, we can only wait." 5 days later, we passed the city of Muscat and entered the Gulf of Aden. I thought the captain would turn back, but he didn't. The following day, we entered the Red Sea. This sea is 2,600 kilometers long and averages about 240 kilometers wide. No rivers run into it. I looked for hours through the open panels at the wonderful coral reefs there. The colors were brilliant, and I saw many rare fish in the clear water. I talked to Captain Nemo about the name and history of the Red Sea. It had always been a dangerous place for ships because of the currents and reefs. "The day after tomorrow, we will be in the Mediterranean," he said. "The Mediterranean? That is not possible," I said. "Why not?" he asked. "You cannot sail around Africa in 2 days." "We will not sail around Africa." I was speechless. Could the Nautilus sail over dry land? "There is a passage," explained the captain. "It is under the ground." I discovered it. I saw that some fish in the Mediterranean were the same as some in the Red Sea. I caught some of them in the Red Sea. I put tags on them and put them back in the water. I went to the Mediterranean and caught some of my tagged fish there. Then I knew that there was a passage. I explored the Red Sea in the Nautilus and found it. I have used it several times. I call it the Arabian Tunnel. I found Council and Ned and told them what Captain Nemo had said. Council clapped his hands. Ned, however, would not believe it. "I would love to be in the Mediterranean the day after tomorrow," he said. "However, I think your Captain Nemo is playing a trick." Chapter 10. The Secret Tunnel. Ned asked, "Do you see that shape?" We had gone further into the Red Sea. We were standing outside, and Ned Land was pointing at something black in the sea. It looked like a whale. "Are there whales in the Red Sea?" asked Counsel. "Sometimes," I replied. "This is not a whale," said Ned Land. "It moves differently." "Is it another nautilus?" asked Counsel. "No, it's an animal," said Ned, who had better sight than we did. "Perhaps it's a mermaid," suggested Counsel. "Don't make me laugh. There are no mermaids," exclaimed Ned. As we came closer, I saw what it was. It was a dugong. "I've never killed a dugong," said Ned. His eyes were shining with excitement. Captain Nemo came out and told Ned that he could use the dinghy. "Try to kill it," he said. "Don't miss it. They can be dangerous." Ned shrugged his shoulders. Danger did not frighten him. 6 crewmen rowed the dinghy, while Ned, Counsel, and I sat in the back. When we were close enough to the dugong, Ned stood in the front of the dinghy, ready to throw his harpoon. He hit the dugong and made it bleed, but it did not die. It swam away, and we rowed after it for an hour. Then it turned around and swam quickly toward us. It was going to attack us. The dugong hit the dinghy and held it with its teeth. It tried to turn us over. Ned attacked it again and again with a harpoon. Finally, it died, and we towed it back to the Nautilus. That evening, we had some of its meat for dinner. It was delicious. The next day, we entered the Strait of Jubail, which leads to the Gulf of Suez. A few hours later, the captain told me that the Nautilus was about to enter the tunnel that led to the Mediterranean. It was difficult to enter the tunnel, so he steered the ship himself and invited me to watch. It was the first time I had been in the pilot's dome. Captain Nemo switched on a powerful electric light, and we went slowly along a rock wall for about an hour. Then I saw the opening of the tunnel, and the Nautilus entered it. The water flowed through the tunnel very quickly and carried the Nautilus along with it, and in only 20 minutes we were in the Mediterranean Sea. I was amazed. Ned and Counsel had been asleep when this happened. They were very surprised to find that they were in the Mediterranean when they woke up. Ned immediately began to talk about escaping, as we were so close to Europe. "Are you unhappy on the Nautilus?" I asked him. "I am very pleased that I have traveled under the water. However, it has to finish." "It will end one day," I said. "I'm sure that Captain Nemo will let us go when he is ready." "He will probably kill us when he is ready," replied Ned. "We have no reason to be afraid," I exclaimed. "I am sure that we will be able to leave or escape sometime in the future." "We should take the opportunity now," said Ned. In the end, I had to agree. I warned him that if we tried to escape and failed, the captain would never forgive us. We would never have another opportunity. "Tell me when you are ready," I told him. However, the Nautilus dived into deep waters, and there was no chance to escape. A day or two later, it came closer to the surface again. We were close to Crete. I was looking at the fish through the windows with Captain Nemo when suddenly I saw a man swimming under the water. He swam to the window, and Captain Nemo made a sign to him. He swam away, and I did not see him again. "That was Nicholas," said the captain. "He lives on an island that spends more time in the water than on land." "Do you know him?" I asked. "Why not, Dr. Aronnax?" He opened a cupboard, and I saw that it was full of gold bars. He filled a large box with them, closed it, and wrote an address on it. 4 men carried the box out of the room. I went back to my room. What was Captain Nemo doing? Soon I realized that the Nautilus was back on the surface, and I heard the dinghy leave. 2 hours later, it returned. I wondered where they had taken the gold. I told Ned and Counsel about it. "Where does he get the gold, and where does it go?" we wondered. Toward the end of the next day, it became very hot in the Nautilus. Captain Nemo explained that we were in a stream of boiling water. We were above an underwater volcano that was erupting. It was too hot to stay there long, and soon we were on the surface again. The next day, we left the islands of Greece, sailing deep under the water. Chapter 11. A Plan to Escape. Ned wanted to escape from the Nautilus while we were in the Mediterranean. However, he had no opportunity. The submarine raced to Gibraltar and into the Atlantic in 2 days, mostly staying deep under the water. Council and I saw very few fish or sea animals because the Nautilus went too fast. It seemed to us that Captain Nemo did not like being so close to Europe. Council thought he saw a leatherback turtle, and I wished I had seen it too, for this is a rare animal. Between Sicily and Gibraltar, I saw many shipwrecks. Some of them were very old, others were more recent. I thought about all the sadness that these shipwrecks had brought to people. So many men had died. So many women had lost their husbands, sons, and fathers. When the Nautilus entered the Atlantic, it had sailed almost 10,000 leagues in 3.5 months. As it surfaced, I wondered where it would go next on this strange journey. The submarine turned north along the coast of Portugal and Spain. Ned Land came to my room. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight?" I was not ready for this. "Tonight," he repeated. "We are a few miles off the Spanish coast. It will be dark, and the wind is blowing in the right direction." "You agreed, Dr. Aronnax, to escape with me. Remember your promise?" I said nothing. "At 9 o'clock," continued Ned Land, "I will go to the staircase with Council. You will wait in the library for our signal. I have already put some food in the dinghy. Everything is ready." "The sea is quite rough," I said. "Yes, but if we don't go tonight, we will soon be too far from land." I was disappointed, but I knew that he was right. I was also frightened. What would Captain Nemo do if he discovered our plan, or if we failed? I had not seen him for several days. Now I did not want to see him. He might notice that I was nervous. I stayed in my room as the hours slowly passed. At 7 o'clock, I had dinner in my room. Only 2 hours to go. I was so nervous that I felt sick. I had a headache. I walked up and down in my room. I wanted to see the museum and art gallery one last time before our escape. As I looked around, I saw that Captain Nemo's bedroom door was open. The room was empty. I saw pictures of famous liberators like Abraham Lincoln and John Brown on the walls. Was Captain Nemo a liberator too? It was 8 o'clock, and I went back to my room. We were still heading north. I dressed in my waterproof clothes and boots and went to the dark library. I waited for Ned's signal. As I waited, the Nautilus's engines stopped. A few moments later, I felt a bump as the submarine came to rest on the ocean floor. The library door opened, and Captain Nemo entered. He told me that we were in Vigo Bay. A Spanish admiral had burned his own ships there in 1702 to prevent the British Navy from taking the huge amount of gold they were carrying. He took me to the window. The crew of the Nautilus were gathering the gold from the sand and bringing it to the submarine. Now I knew how Captain Nemo had become so rich. "But of what use is all this gold to you?" I asked. "It is of no use to me," he replied, "but it can help people who are suffering and oppressed." He stopped. Perhaps he thought he had said too much. However, I now understood that he was helping whole races of oppressed people. Ned Land came to my room the next morning. "We were unlucky," he said. "The Nautilus stopped just as we were about to escape. Perhaps we can try again tonight." I told him what I had learned about Captain Nemo and the gold. I hoped that Ned would change his mind, but he didn't. He was still determined to escape. I checked the compass. The Nautilus was going away from the land. Early in the afternoon it surfaced. We went onto the decks, but the land was already out of sight. Escape was impossible now. Ned was disappointed, but I was not. Soon we were back under the water, and sailing even further away from land. At 11 o'clock that night, I was surprised to receive a visit from Captain Nemo. He invited me to go for a night walk under the sea. "It is a long and difficult walk," he warned me. "However, it is worth the trouble." Of course, I agreed to go. He did not invite Ned or Council, and I soon realized that no crew members were going with us either. What did he want to show me in these dark waters? Chapter 12. A Lost City. Captain Nemo and I walked away from the Nautilus in our diving suits. It was very dark, except for a red light glowing about 2 miles away. What could it be? We walked toward it. I saw piles of stones as the red light grew stronger. Then I saw a white light on top of a mountain. The red light came from behind it. I followed Captain Nemo as he began to climb up the mountain, which was covered in dead trees. I noticed that some of them were pines. How did they grow here, under the sea? As we climbed higher, the path became more difficult. I stayed close to Captain Nemo. We came to some large caves, and I saw giant crabs and lobsters in them. I wanted to stop and study them, but Captain Nemo continued to climb, and I had to follow him. We came to a wide flat area, where I saw the ruins of buildings covered in seaweed. Still the captain did not stop, and we climbed to the top of the mountain. It was a volcano. The red light came from lava flowing down the other side of the mountain. Below it, I could see an entirely ruined city. Captain Nemo took a piece of white rock and scratched a word on a black rock. Atlantis. This was the ancient city that the Greek historians wrote about. It had been destroyed by earthquakes and sunk below the sea. I was looking at it. I wished I had more time to explore the city, but after a few minutes, Captain Nemo began to climb back down the mountain, and we returned to the Nautilus. I was exhausted and slept until 11 o'clock the next morning. Then I told Council what I had seen, and together we looked through the windows. We were passing other parts of the ruined city. I began to tell him about the history of Atlantis, but he was more interested in the fish that he could see. These were not very different from other fish that we had seen, but if you are interested in fish, then even small differences are important. All day we sailed a few feet above the ocean floor. Then we came to some high cliffs. Suddenly, the panels of the windows slid shut. I went to my room and fell asleep. I woke at 8 o'clock the next morning. The instruments told me that we were on the surface, but the Nautilus did not rock and roll in the waves. I climbed onto the deck. It was dark. I could not see any stars. Then I heard Captain Nemo. "We are underground," he announced and switched on a bright light. We were tied up to a jetty on a lake inside a large circular cave. "We are inside an extinct volcano," explained the captain. "Everybody thinks it is a small uninhabited island, but it is a very safe home for us." "Why do you need a safe home?" I asked. "The Nautilus is always safe under the water." "That is true, but we do need coal to make sodium for the batteries. This island has coal, and my men mine it." "Will I see them mining?" "No, not this time. We will only stay for 1 day to load some sodium for our storage. You may explore the shore if you like." After breakfast, I took Council and Ned Land with me, and we climbed onto the shore. Ned wanted to see if there was a way out of the cave. There was a sandy shore all around the lake. Beyond the sand, there were many loose rocks, and we began to climb up them. Ned was still looking for a way out, but there was none. After a while, we climbed back to the shoreline and rested near a large cave. When the water began to rise with the tide, we completed our walk around the lake and returned to the Nautilus. It was ready to leave, but it stayed there all night. We could not understand this, but the next day it left its home, and we sailed away across the Atlantic. Chapter 13. Icebergs and Whales. The Nautilus continued in a southerly direction until we reached the Sargasso Sea. This is a large area of water in the Atlantic, surrounded by the Gulf Stream current, which carries seaweed and grass into it. The Nautilus kept a few feet beneath the seaweed, and by the next day we had crossed it. The sea was normal again. We sailed 100 leagues every day for the next 18 days. Ned became more and more miserable, as he realized that there would be no opportunities to escape. Should we try to persuade Captain Nemo to let us go? We didn't dare to try. He might become suspicious and make sure that we would never be able to escape. I began to think that we would never see other people again. This part of the ocean had few ships, and we often sailed on the surface. One day, we were chased by men in boats who thought the Nautilus was a whale. Captain Nemo took the Nautilus under the water to end the chase. We saw many different kinds of fish, including dolphins, which played near the submarine, and flying fish. We reached a very deep part of the ocean, and the Nautilus went down as far as it could. Down and down went the submarine. After an hour, we reached a depth of 6,000 meters. An hour later, we were at 13,000 meters. The pressure on the outside of the Nautilus was huge. At 16,000 meters, Captain Nemo brought a camera into the room and took some photographs of the sea floor. "I think we had better go back up," said the captain. "Hold on." The Nautilus pointed itself upwards and sped through the water. In 4 minutes, it reached the surface and flew into the air like a flying fish before falling back into the sea. We sailed further and further south. When we reached Cape Horn, we did not turn westward, but continued sailing south. Where was Captain Nemo going? Ned Land was bored. He kept thinking about what he would do if he could get on land again. He was not interested in fish and shells and underwater exploration. One morning, we were sitting on the deck when Ned saw a large whale. "I wish I could harpoon it," he exclaimed. We watched as it came closer and closer to the Nautilus. Others followed it, and Ned ran off to ask Captain Nemo if he could hunt them. Captain Nemo came onto the deck. He looked at the whales. "They are Antarctic whales. We have no use for whale oil on the Nautilus," he said. "You would only be killing them because you like killing them. Leave them alone." Ned could not understand this way of thinking. He turned his back on us. Then the captain saw some other whales. "Those are sperm whales," he said. "They are huge, evil animals who attack Antarctic whales. We will use the Nautilus to hunt the sperm whales and save the Antarctic whales." Ned, Counsel, and I watched through the windows as the Nautilus dived and attacked the huge sperm whales. It was an exciting battle. The Nautilus crashed into and through the huge whales. It chased one and then another. They began to attack the submarine. Ned was very excited and shouted at the whales through the windows. Some of the whales were cut in half by the submarine. Others died when the Nautilus hit their heads. We continued killing the sperm whales for more than an hour. Finally, we surfaced. Dead sperm whales floated on a sea of blood. "That is how we hunt sperm whales," said the captain. "That is not hunting," replied Ned. "It is butchering. I prefer my harpoon." "Everyone does it in his own way," said the captain. Ned Land and Captain Nemo stared at each other angrily. From that day, I noticed that Ned Land became less and less friendly with Captain Nemo. I decided to watch Ned closely. I was worried that he might cause a problem. After the battle with the whales, the Nautilus continued to sail south. It was traveling quickly, and soon we saw ice floating on the sea. Ned had seen icebergs before, but Counsel and I looked at them for the first time. As we went further south, there were more and more icebergs, and they were bigger and bigger. They were like ice islands. We saw different kinds of birds on them. As we continued traveling south, the weather changed. It was very cold now. We wore fur clothes when we were on the deck. Captain Nemo remained on the deck as we sailed between the icebergs. He watched everything carefully to make sure that the Nautilus would not hit them. We passed the South Shetland Islands. Captain Nemo told me that seals once lived there. British and American whalers had killed them all, he said sadly. Chapter 14. At the South Pole. The ice was beautiful. I had never seen anything like it. Captain Nemo steered the Nautilus through narrow passages between the ice islands. As we sailed further south, the Nautilus had to break the ice to make its own passage. Finally, a huge wall of ice blocked our path. "It's the ice cap," said Ned. "We can't go any further." We could not go back. The ice had closed up behind us, and soon the Nautilus itself was stuck in the ice. "We will go under the ice," declared Captain Nemo. "If there is land there, we will stop. If there is no land, we will reach the South Pole." I was excited, but Ned thought the captain was mad. "We will never return," he said. The Nautilus dived to about 800 meters and traveled quickly under the ice cap. Council and I looked for fish, but there were none. The sea was empty. We traveled under the ice for 2 days. Sometimes the Nautilus would bump into the bottom of the ice cap to see how thick it was. During the second day, the ice became thinner. On the third day, Captain Nemo announced that we had reached the open sea. We rushed onto the deck to see open water and a small island. Beyond the island, we could see a larger area of land. The captain, 2 of his men, Council, and I rowed to the land in the dinghy. Since the captain had never been here before, we were the first people to stand on unknown land. There was not much vegetation, but there were lots of birds feeding on the fish. We returned to the Nautilus. The crew had caught some fish in their nets, and we ate some for dinner. The next day, we went back to the land and walked among the seals and walruses. They were not afraid of us, because they had never seen men before. Captain Nemo was not able to say where we were because the sky was so cloudy that we could not see the sun. On the third day, we climbed up a small, steep hill, and at midday, the sun appeared. Captain Nemo studied his instruments and announced that we were at the South Pole. We all cheered. The captain put a flag on the hill and claimed the land for himself. We returned to the Nautilus. The next day, it was very cold. We could see ice beginning to form on the sea. The Nautilus dived and began its return voyage. I could not sleep that night. I kept thinking about all the things we had seen. We had been on the Nautilus for 5 months and traveled 14,000 leagues. We had seen amazing things, and now we were the first people to reach the South Pole. What else would we see and do? Suddenly, I felt a shock. The Nautilus had stopped moving and was leaning to one side. It was stuck under an iceberg. Captain Nemo was clearly worried. He used the pressure tanks to straighten his submarine and then to descend. The ice seemed about to crush the Nautilus. But we slowly moved away from it. Through the windows, we could see walls of ice all around us. We were in a kind of tunnel. The Nautilus moved in one direction, but soon bumped against the ice. It moved in the other direction and traveled quickly for several hours. Then there was another bump. Captain Nemo told us that we were trapped inside an iceberg. We were in a tunnel, with ice above us and below us. Both ends of the tunnel were blocked with more ice. Ned hit the table angrily. "Friends," said Captain Nemo, "there are 2 ways of dying in this situation. We have enough air for 2 days, but we may be crushed before that. We will try to cut a way out of the iceberg." The Nautilus descended to the bottom of our tunnel. Captain Nemo and some of the crew went out with tools to cut the ice. Ned went with them. They used a long pole and found that we were lying on 10 meters of ice. The men immediately began to cut the ice under the Nautilus. After 2 hours, they were replaced by other men, including Council and me. We worked for another 2 hours. We measured how much ice we had removed. It was not enough. It would take 5 nights and 4 days to remove enough ice to free the Nautilus. However, there was only enough air for 2 days. Chapter 15. Attacked by Giant Squid. We were trapped in the ice. We worked hard. By the next morning, the hole was deeper, but now the sides of the tunnel were narrowing. We worked harder. The hole grew deeper, but the air in the Nautilus was very bad. Then the captain had a new idea. He heated water in his batteries and pumped it into the hole. This stopped the sides from narrowing, and the men worked as quickly as they could to dig the hole deeper. It was a terrible night. We had so little air that everybody had a headache. We could hardly breathe. Then the captain drove the Nautilus into the hole. The ice cracked. Suddenly, the Nautilus was free. It sped quickly northwards, still under the ice. We still had no air. My face was purple and my lips were blue. I could not breathe. I could not see or hear. I was going to die. Ned and Council found some air in one of the diving tanks. They gave it to me. Then I felt the Nautilus bump into the ice above us. Again and again it hit the ice. Finally, it broke through. Air rushed into the submarine, and we could breathe again. Ned, Counsel, and I rushed onto the deck. We breathed, and I thanked my friends for saving me with the air in the tanks. The Nautilus continued sailing north for several days. We were heading back to the Atlantic. Ned was more determined than ever to escape, but we did not know our destination. The captain did not appear for many days. We saw Terra del Fuego and the Falkland Islands. We sailed up the coast of South America, past the mouth of the Amazon, and across the equator. In all this time, we did not see the captain. We had been on the Nautilus for 6 months and traveled 17,000 leagues. We were healthy and mostly happy, but we wanted to return to land. "Ask the captain if he plans to keep us forever," suggested Ned. I told him I would think about it for a few days. We were near the Bahamas when Ned saw caves under the water. "This is where giant squid live." I said, "Perhaps we will see some." "I don't believe they exist," declared Ned. He changed his mind very quickly when we saw an 8-meter squid rushing toward the Nautilus. 7 others followed it. Suddenly, the Nautilus stopped. Captain Nemo came into the room. We had not seen him for a long time. "We are going to fight the squid," he said. "One of them has a tentacle stuck in the propeller. We cannot move until we free it." The submarine slowly surfaced. The men were ready with axes. Ned had his harpoon. When the door opened, a tentacle came into the submarine. Captain Nemo cut it off with his axe. Many more tentacles were holding on to the outside of the Nautilus. 2 tentacles took hold of a man and dragged him out. He was soon dead. The other man rushed onto the deck and angrily attacked the tentacles with axes and knives. Blood and black ink covered the deck. Several tentacles lay in the water. Ned attacked the squid with his harpoon. One of them knocked him over. Captain Nemo saved him by throwing his axe into the monster's mouth. 15 minutes later, the battle was over. Captain Nemo, covered in blood, stood on the deck and cried for his dead crewmen. For the next 10 days, the Nautilus did not go far. Then it headed north again, and we entered the Gulf Stream. As we approached the coast of America, Ned began to think about escape again. However, the weather was very bad. It was too dangerous to be in a small boat. He repeated his request that I talk to the captain. "Soon we will see Canada, my home. I cannot stay on the submarine. I will throw myself into the sea." "I will ask him next time I see him." "Shall I go and see him myself?" "I will see him tomorrow." "Today." "All right, today." It had to be done. Chapter 16. Maelstrom, Maelstrom. For the first time on our long voyage, I went to the captain's room and knocked on his door. He was surprised to see me. He told me he was writing his life story and would throw it into the sea in a bottle before he died. I asked him if he would ever let us leave the Nautilus. "When you entered the Nautilus 7 months ago, I told you that you would never leave. That is still my answer. Do not ask me again." Ned was disappointed and angry. "We will try to escape, even if the weather is bad," he declared. However, the weather was worse than bad. It was a huge storm. Captain Nemo stood on the deck as the waves rose above the submarine and crashed onto it. It was impossible to stand in the strong wind, and he tied himself to the deck. Lightning flashed across the sky. The noise of the waves, the wind, and the thunder was deafening. At last the captain came back inside, and the Nautilus descended to 50 meters. Here the water was calm and quiet. It was difficult to believe that the storm was just 50 meters above us. After the storm, the Nautilus headed eastwards, and escape was impossible. Ned stayed in his room. The captain also stayed in his room. We passed huge schools of cod near Newfoundland. We saw the transatlantic cable lying on the ocean floor. We continued going eastwards, and then southwards. I wondered if Captain Nemo would enter the English Channel. Ned came out of his room and watched our course carefully, but Captain Nemo did not appear. We saw Land's End, and then the Nautilus began to go around in circles. Captain Nemo came out of his room, but would not speak to me. The next day we continued going around in circles. Captain Nemo came out and looked around. "It is here," he said. The Nautilus descended to the ocean floor, and we saw the wreck of a large ship called the Venier. Captain Nemo was very pleased to see it. Then we returned to the surface. We saw a large ship about 8 miles away, and it came toward us. It was a warship and began to fire its guns at us. When it was only 3 miles away, Ned tried to wave his handkerchief at it, but the captain saw it and knocked him down. The ship kept firing at us, and Captain Nemo ordered us to go to our rooms. "I'm going to sink this ship," he declared angrily. "You are not." "I am. Go to your room. You should not have seen this." Captain Nemo and some of his men stared at the ship with hatred in their eyes. We had to go to our rooms. The Nautilus sailed away from the ship, which chased us. I went back on the deck and tried to speak to the captain. "Be quiet," he shouted. "I will take my revenge. I am the law and I am justice." I went back down and told Ned and Council that we would escape as soon as the ship came close enough to see us. They agreed. Early the next morning, when the ship was only 1.5 miles away, the men prepared the Nautilus for an attack. "The time has come," I told my friends. We went to the stairs that led to the deck, but it was too late. The door slammed shut, and the Nautilus began to descend. It was going to ram the ship from below. It sped toward the ship and hit it. The ship sank, and we watched it from the windows. All the men on it drowned. Captain Nemo took out a picture of a woman and 2 children and cried. I returned to my room, but could not sleep that night. The Nautilus sped quickly north toward the Arctic seas. We did not see the captain or any of his crew. One morning, Ned Land came to me and told me that we were going to escape. He had seen some land and was determined to reach it or die. "We will take the dinghy at 10 o'clock tonight. It will be dark then," he said. I agreed to go with him. It was a long day. I remembered everything we had seen and done. At 10 o'clock, I went toward the boat. Then I heard Captain Nemo playing his organ, and I heard him shout, "Enough! Enough!" I raced to the dinghy and shouted, "Let's go!" Ned began to loosen the dinghy. Then we heard voices shouting, "Maelstrom! Maelstrom!" The whirlpool was dragging the Nautilus deep under the water. It was impossible to leave the submarine at this time, but we had no choice. The bolts broke, and the dinghy shot free of the Nautilus into the whirlpool. I hit my head on an iron bar, and I don't know what happened next. I woke up in a fisherman's house in Norway. Ned and Council were with me. What happened to the Nautilus? Did it escape the maelstrom? Is it still sailing under the waters? Will Captain Nemo's life story be found one day? I don't know. I don't know.
Playlet. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Scene 1. A submarine is on the surface of the sea. A man is standing on the deck. It is Ned Land. He holds on to a rail with one hand and shades his eyes with the other as he looks into the distance. He shakes his head slowly and sadly. Then he sighs and shakes his head again. He is very unhappy. A few moments later, another man comes onto the deck. It is Dr. Aronnax.
"Ah, Ned, I thought I would find you here."
Ned Land looks around at Dr. Aronnax, but doesn't speak.
"The weather is getting worse."
"Yes." He turns back to look into the distance. Dr. Aronnax goes to stand beside him.
"It's a shame. I'm certain that we can see the coast of America in the distance. It would be a perfect place to escape if the weather were better. It looks like a storm coming. The dinghy would never get to shore."
Yes, I know that, Dr. Aronnax. I suppose you are happy.
"We just have to wait for a better opportunity."
That's what you always say. You said that you would talk to Captain Nemo. You were going to ask him if he would ever let us get off the Nautilus. Have you done it?
There has been no opportunity. I haven't seen him for days.
Why are you waiting? You can go to his room and knock on the door and ask him, can't you? Soon we will be looking at Canada, my homeland. I can't bear it. I must get off the Nautilus. I will throw myself into the sea.
All right. I will ask him the next time I see him.
Shall I go and see him myself?
No. I will go and see him tomorrow.
Today.
All right. Today.
Scene 2. Dr. Aronnax is standing in front of a door. He looks nervous. He walks away from it, but then returns. He knocks on the door. There is no answer. He walks away again and returns again. He knocks more loudly. A moment later, the door opens, and Captain Nemo comes out. He looks at Dr. Aronnax with raised eyebrows.
Captain Nemo? I'm sorry to disturb you.
I'm very busy.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry, but it is important.
What could be more important than my work? I am writing the story of my life, so that one day everybody can read about what I did and how I did it.
But how?
Don't worry, Dr. Aronnax. I have thought of everything. The last person alive on this ship will put the story in a glass bottle and throw it into the sea. Somebody will find it one day.
There is a better way. We could take it for you.
You? What do you mean?
I mean, Captain Nemo, that you could put us ashore. Surely you do not intend to keep us on the Nautilus for the rest of our lives?
Dr. Aronnax, when you entered the Nautilus 7 months ago, I told you that you would never leave. That is still my answer. Do not ask me again.
But Captain Nemo, it is not easy for us. We are not like you. We want to leave.
Silence! I will hear no more of this. You will stay on the Nautilus.
Captain Nemo goes into his room and shuts the door. Dr. Aronnax looks at the closed door, walks away from it slowly, and returns. He raises his hand to knock again, but stops. He walks slowly away, shaking his head. Scene 3. Dr. Aronnax, Ned Land, and Conseil are sitting in a room. They all look sad.
I'm sorry, Ned. I did my best, but he refused to listen to me.
Are you sure you did your best? Dr. Aronnax always does his best. Does he? I'm not so sure. Anyway, I'm grateful that you spoke to him, Dr. Aronnax. The captain is a very stubborn and stupid man. How does he expect to keep us here on his submarine forever? We are not his slaves. He should let us go.
I used to think that he would let us go. Now I don't think so.
If you stay on the Nautilus for the rest of your life, Dr. Aronnax, I will stay with you.
Thank you, Counsel.
But I will not. We must escape, even if the weather is bad. Remember that you promised to escape with me, Dr. Aronnax. Remember your promise.
Yes, that's true. You are right. I like the Nautilus, but I do not understand Captain Nemo. I'm sure that he is angry with me now. I do not want to stay here for the rest of my life. We must escape. Do you agree, Counsel?
But of course, Dr. Aronnax. Good. So we agree that we must escape, even if the weather is bad. We must take the risk.
Yes, we are in agreement, but we cannot go now because of the storm that is coming. We will go after the storm.
I have got some food and water in my room. I will take it to the dinghy and tell you when I am ready. I am sure we will succeed. But if we do not, I would rather die than stay here. The three men shake hands and leave the room.